For the final time, number 24, Kobe Bryant.
And the Lakers are going to win on Kobe's last night. He's going to score 60, and I don't believe what I just saw.
It was the end of more than an era. For the Lakers, it had been the age of Kobe. For 20 years, Kobe Bryant had been more than a Laker. Even when he wasn't the best player on the team, he had been the Laker, the dyed-in-the-wool pillar of the franchise. 5 titles. And even as he was slowed by age and injuries, Kobe remained the central character in the Lakers' story. So large did Kobe loom for the Lakers that his last season was treated more as a farewell tour than, well, a competitive season. In that last season, with Kobe playing 66 games, the Lakers were abysmal. They won only 17 times. In the first 2 seasons after Kobe retired, with Luke Walton as head coach, they won 26 games, and then 35 games. But that 2017-18 season was the 5th consecutive in which they failed to reach the playoffs. Before that streak started, the team had missed the playoffs only 5 times ever. Clearly, this was a situation that called for an intervention by a superstar, which is exactly what happened. With LeBron James now in purple and gold, everything would change. Excellence would be restored. The franchise would assume its rightful place at the apex of the NBA. But that didn't happen in the 2018-19 season, year 1 of the James era. Instead, with James playing only half the season due to injury, the Lakers improved from 35 wins to 37, and again failed to reach the playoffs. The day the season ended, President of Basketball Operations Magic Johnson resigned, which did little to dispel the notion that even with LeBron, this once model franchise was now a model of dysfunction. But then, reinforcement was called in. Serious reinforcement in the person of Anthony Davis.
It's not only his basketball skills, but who he is as a person that makes us so proud to introduce Anthony Davis as a member of the Los Angeles Lakers.
Now, with James and Davis, a return to glory seemed more likely than not, which is what would happen. But amid this renaissance, heartbreak and tragedy.
Kobe Bryant has died in a helicopter crash at the age of 41.
With Bryant's death, the remainder of the Lakers' 2019-2020 season would be played in mourning, and then it would be halted, like the rest of the world, by the pandemic.
The game tonight has been postponed.
When the season resumed, the Lakers were playing not at home, but like everyone else, in Orlando, in the bubble. In the playoffs, which they reached for the first time in 7 years, they took off, losing only 3 games in the first 3 rounds. And then, in the finals,
this historic 2020 NBA championship belongs to the Los Angeles Lakers.
A victory for the franchise, for the greatest force in the game, and more.
I want to continue along with my teammates to continue his legacy, not only for this year, but as long as we can play the game of basketball that we love, because that's what Kobe Bryant will want.
Now the Lakers are back home, playing in downtown LA. And depending on the health of James and Davis, they might win it all again. But nothing will surpass the emotion and the power of what they achieved last October, amid so much tragedy. 5 years since Kobe's last game. No one could have imagined what these years would bring. And for more, we are joined now by ESPN senior writer Ramona Shelburne. Ramona, it's been half a decade. What do you remember most vividly about that night 5 years ago today?
First of all, I can't believe it's been 5 years from that night. But you know, I remember I was doing so many television hits that day, right? Because it was Kobe's last game, and there had been this tremendous buildup, and so I was texting with him throughout the day, saying, how are you feeling? What are you going to do tonight? How is this going to be? And he was so moved on already. Like he was so talking about what he was going to do the next day and the day after that. I mean, he was, and I go, well, come on, when are you going to cry? Like he was so in a different place already, and I think that is what I remember most from that night. Kobe had been preparing for the end of his career for the past 2 or 3 years before that, but really ever since his Achilles injury, when he realized that his body just couldn't hold up and he wasn't going to be Kobe anymore in the court. He had just transitioned, and he had been thinking about this and what he was going to do after basketball for quite some time, preparing for it, because he didn't want to be Michael Jordan afterwards. He didn't want to be Jordan with the Wizards. He knew how big a hole this was going to leave in his life. And so he had transitioned into the next phase of his basketball journey already. But he still, of course, had one more thing left for us that night. And I'll never forget this, okay? At the end, Jeremy, I don't know if people know this. You know how he makes a speech at the end of the night, right? And he says "Mamba out." At that very moment, T-shirts on his own website were offered for sale saying "Mamba out." And I remember I was like, wait, how are the T-shirts ready? Did they know he was going to say that? Oh, he planned that. I mean, it was amazing how well he had choreographed the end of his career all the way down to what he was going to say when he dropped the mic.
Ramona, taking into account all that's happened the last 5 years, all the heartache, and then winning it 6 months ago, how do you put into perspective what it's been like covering this team since Kobe's last game?
Yeah, the thing about Kobe is that he was an incredible storyteller. He understood story better than you or I, okay? Jerry, we're storytellers professionally as a living, okay? But he studied it, and he, in a lot of ways, had been telling his own story for his entire career. And it's weird to think about how different it's been covering this team since his passing, but it's part of his story. Their story is part of his story. And that's something that you just can't write a better finish for a man's legacy and career. And it's far too short, far too, though it ended so tragically, but the fact that we're all still talking about him, and we will all still talk about him for so long, again, he surprises me. He wrote his own ending in that way.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.